freedom to change it into a silver sword from the silver bullet, because it was announced with the Halloween text. So I was like, yeah, I need something with monsters and slaying monsters and stuff. So this is why I have this theme. For everyone who is not geeky enough to play The Witcher 3, this is The Witcher 3. I took it as a theme a bit. So don't sue me if you're from whoever develops that. Anyway, who am I? Just quickly. I'm a PhD student at Chalmers. Yeah, and I'm working in web security and quite a lot around CSPs, so that's why I thought I could fit here, hopefully. Yeah. Yeah, let's dive into it, I would say. I hope I move over here, okay, because otherwise I'm in the picture. Yeah, let me introduce Charles of Web Security. Actually, yeah, Charles of Rivia, but I renamed it. He is this monster slayer. He's a witcher. He's a monster slayer, and he has some special gear. And the most important is actually his silver sword to slay some monsters. And he also has this amulet around his neck that vibrates when some monsters are nearby. And because he's Gerald of Web Security, he hunts some special monsters, which is cross-site scripting attacks in particular. He really hates them. So now I really face a big problem. I don't really know my audience. So I don't know, who is in web security somehow knows about cross-site scripting? Yeah, so that's quite a bit. Okay, so I should actually ask her the other way around, who doesn't really know what those things are. So a few, yeah? Okay, thanks for being honest. So cross-site scripting is when you just have some, make it quick, injection attack, and yeah, you just make something run in the browser that shouldn't be there and it shouldn't run. So you have different kinds of attacks, right? So you can like host some malicious code on the server, and then you just request it as the stored reflected is when you in the parameter you encode you put the code there, and then the parameter is somehow used on the server side to get it into the web page that is generated, and then it's kind of like reflected on the server and executes. And DOM-based is like you don't need the server for that, but you just do it all in the browser by reading out some parameter or something. So different kinds of cross-site scripting, and whoever heard about CSP before knows that this, yeah, this is meant for it. So yeah, what is CSP? Let's dive into it. Who has not heard about CSP? Yes, there's some people. Yeah, because I have some slides that explain it. I will not click on this link because those kind of things never work. So I just tell you what you will find in the first, or in one of the first links. This hat over there is from Mike West. Mike West is Google Chrome security engineer, and he pushes forward some standards, and so also with the content security policy. And he wrote a very nice introduction to it 4 years ago. And yeah, in the introduction of the introduction, he says something: if an attack successfully injects any code at all, it's pretty much game over. User session data is compromised, and information that should be kept secret is exfiltrated to the bad guys. We'd obviously like to prevent that if possible. So obviously, there's some things that we don't want. Successful injection, of course. And then some things can happen, like data is compromised, of course, and the exfiltration part, also that one goal to prevent that. Right? So yeah, that was 4 years ago. Super motivated, the silver bullet or silver sword, right? So let's look at it. Content security policy is basically a whitelist. So this is, yeah, here a nice example. So you have the so-called directives, which are yeah, the content type, I can like roughly say. It's not really true, but like, yeah, for scripts, for example, you can say then here list of domains where you want to load some stuff from, or want to allow where things can be loaded from. Where you like image source, you can just say like, wow, from my own domain. Woohoo. And there's a huge list of directives. Also things like form data, that yeah, when you have a form where you can submit it to, and if it is not present, then there's a default source, which is like the fallback, and in our case is like the empty list here, so you can say no, none to like, and make it like super restrictive and say nothing allowed. This down here is actually, my personal opinion, one of the things that makes CSP powerful. That is, inline scripts are forbidden by default, and also eval functions. I will come to inline scripts in a bit, so I will not say too much now. Eval function or eval-like function is, well, the eval function itself, but also things like set timeout, or anything that takes some string and interprets it as some actual script. Right? So you can re-enable those things, but so much said now already, don't do that. That takes really away a lot of power from CSP. So yeah, that's not really advised. Yeah, let's look at Gerald's nice amulet. There's also a directive report URI. So violations, they happen in the browser, and you never know what happens, right? If something goes wrong. So you want to know that, so you can define that, and then you get nice violation reports to your server, whatever you give there. And yeah, you can then fix your CSP. There's also a, you can call it testing mode or something. There's the reports only mode. So you get the violation reports like if you would really enforce it, but you actually don't. So you just get the violation reports, and you can check out if a CSP is good enough or not, and those kind of things. So last but not least, there's even one more feature. You can define CSP also in a HTML. Tag the meter with an HTTP equivalent. That is useful if you want to load something, and then like from a domain, but you only want that particular thing, and then you want to lock it down afterwards, and then you can just inject or define the CSP and just put it in your code, and then kind of like raise the bars. Yeah, I think we're ready to slay the first or to meet the first enemy. It actually starts with the HTTP equivalent. So imagine you are the attacker and you find injection vulnerability in a web page. What can you do? Well, you just learned about CSPs, so that's great. So what do? Is you can inject an HTTP equivalent, HTML element with a content security policy in report only mode. So it's kind of like very sneaky because nothing is really blocked. But you set the report URI to your own evil server, and the default source to none. So basically, every single thing that is loaded is reported to your server, you as the attacker. That's of course very sneaky, very mean. That was discovered quite some years ago already. So yeah, the first thing they did is, of course, they stripped off a lot of things from the reports themselves, like request parameters and all this. And in fact, also the report URI directive is no longer allowed in the HTTP equivalent. So yeah, that is fixed. Yeah, first victory. Unsafe inline. Unsafe inline is, everybody probably who wrote a bit of web pages and maintained some stuff has some some inline code in there, right? So inline code is really everything that is in between those tags, but also like when you have like on a button like on click and then some function call or something. All this is inline script. So people just like, okay, I have that, but I don't want to change my web page. Oh yeah, put unsafe inline there. now imagine again, vulnerable page. Imagine a reflected cross-site scripting. So somehow you send some request to the server, and whatever, in the parameter there's the evil code in there, and that injects some inline scripts, and then it's executed in the browser, right? So why is it executed? Because we have unsafe inline, and the browser cannot tell what is actually the evil code and which one is the benign code that you actually wrote yourself as the developer and not the attacker. So that, the browser there's no way to identify it. So also, let's check this out. People came up with a nice thing and say, can we not have some unsafe inline, because we need that very often, but not just like the complete thing. So they said, okay, let's use some nonces. Let's create some mechanism that allows to label the inline scripts that we want to allow. And that's basically it. So you can have, instead of just the unsafe inline, you just create nonces, and then you just mark the scripts respectively. What you can also do is you can, because you know which inline script you want to have, you can also compute the hashes. So you can say, well, I just include the hash of those scripts I want to allow in my CSP, and when the attacker injects something wherever it is not executed, because, well, then it probably does not match the hash. Now we really have all features of CSP up to CSP2, and that is quite nice and powerful. So we're even more ready to face the bigger beasts. Great. So just a normal CSP. I guess everybody uses some analytics script somewhere in some web page, or has seen how they work at least. So what they do is usually, like Google Analytics here, there's some scripts which collect some data, and then they create an image, and in the parameters you send out the information. Right? Like this from my web page, nothing secret here. It's like, it's collected on my web page, and it goes to Google Analytics server, and that is my account identifier, and to make it actually not being blocked by CSP in the image source, we just include Google Analytics.com. Right? Seems legit, doesn't it? Nothing bad here. But now, the problem is, let's assume again, there's a vulnerability in there. So somehow, the attacker can inject some code. Well, it cannot connect to its own server, because that is not allowed, right? So in our CSP, it cannot just send something to evil.com. But what an attacker can do is, well, it can just send exactly the same image request to Google Analytics, but just modify a bit. So you can send the you can just modify the analytics identifier to the attacker one. And depending on how powerful you are, you can also just like put some secrets in there, just like username, password, or whatever you want to know. Right? And then on the Google Analytics page, it just pops up and you see all this stuff there. So, problem with CSP. Now I say, well, but I don't allow your scripts to run, right? So I have like nonces and hashes in my CSP and all this. Well, what can you do as an attacker? You can run scriptless attacks. So what I can do is just like have a static image in there that, of course, very likely does not contain any private information or anything, but still you can learn one bit, like where was someone on which web page. So the overall problem here is that the attacker and the benign service shares the same source. And for the whitelist, there's no way to prevent this. So whitelists are, yeah, they seem so cool in the beginning and it's easy to understand, right? But they're not really that good. So they allow for, yeah, data exfiltration, just in the example before, but they also allow for freakier things like, yeah, downgrading libraries and all those things. That would be too complicated code, so that's why I don't have it here. But I can show you if you're interested later on. Yeah, so there are even freakier attacks possible where you get much more power as an attacker also. But it gets even worse. To explain that, what goes even more wrong, yeah, is I step back a bit and explain how browsers prefetch for performance reasons. So web browsers do a lot of stuff. Just imagine you have a web page with a link for next. And of course, the browser is like, okay, the user probably clicks on that next link. And what can I do? I can resolve already whatever server will be yeah, contacted afterwards. If I'm really sure, I can go even further and say like, yeah, why do I not do like the TCP connect and yeah, handshakes, whatever I need, and build up the connection. I can even prefetch the resources, even completely pre-render the whole web page, and just like when you really click on next, then just like put it in the front. There's nothing more instant than that, right? Yeah, that's pretty cool. That makes browsers pretty fast, but of course now this is not about performance in browsers. So let's look again, this in the back of our heads at CSP. So let's assume we have a CSP which is super most restrictive as possible, which is that one up here. So default source null. So it doesn't allow anything. But still, we kind of manage somehow to get a link in. That might even be just on a user comment of some forum or whatever. We can create a link. So what happens is, well, the browser tries to do those kind of things. Now, depending on, of course, the power of the attacker, let's say we can execute kind of a little bit of script. We just yeah, put some secret in the domain name. Now the browser tries to resolve that and asks like, yeah, evil.com, do you know the subdomains, my password evil.com? No, it doesn't exist, but thank you for telling me. And out is the secret. So CSP does not prevent all this parts here. It only goes for the actual resource prefetching, and this is blocked. So this is a problem. Like, can exfiltrate data quite easily through that. Yeah. CSP, now I talk really badly about it. It doesn't prevent data exfiltration. The whitelisting is kind of, yeah, not so good. And I didn't talk about it yet, but practice is pretty hard to configure and yeah, keep up with the changes on a web page, like, and always change the whitelist or whatever happens there. So what is it really good for? Should we use it? Is it more overhead than actually use? Well, first of all, I'm actually pretty badass to have it, right? It's kind of hip nowadays to have a CSP. It does not make you invincible. And CSP is good if you have a strict one. It does add the certain speed bumps to slow down attackers or, yeah, make certain attacks not possible anymore. But just be aware of what it can do and what not. So data exfiltration is certainly not one of the things CSP can do. Well, just quickly, what makes a good CSP? a good starting point for defining one is default source none. That just blocks everything CSP can block. And then you certainly want to have a script source and an object source in there. Well, the script source we talked about before quite a lot. The object source didn't pop up yet, but it is for plugins. So you can, in like Flash or whatever, you can run scripts. So if you want to prevent some cross-site scripting, you certainly want to impose some restrictions on plugins too. Yeah, just to check it out, Google put up a nice tool online like 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's pretty neat, some nice feedback and all this. Then yeah, just check out your play around with it if you feel like it. That's pretty nice. Yeah, so I do have time. Yoo-hoo. That was the backup stop slide if I should talk too much. That's why I just continue. Yeah. First, maybe, just for completeness, CSP is not the only thing that is out there. So there are a lot of other headers that are pretty cool, and other security features you should be aware of and should use, hopefully. So there's strict transport security, for example, that like you can force HTTPS. That's pretty nice. Well, there's CSP. And then there's sub-resource integrity, where you, like, similar to the hash in CSP itself. So you can say, okay, when you load that script, that library, it must be exactly that version of the library. So you can make an integrity check on what is loaded in the browser. And public key pinning, that is for malicious certificate authorities and all this. You can check, like, is the fingerprint of my certificate, is that the right thing, and all those things. I will not go into detail with those because they could talk half an hour for each of those themselves. But be aware of them and use them. So, back to CSP. Problem? You understand that? Don't try, it doesn't matter. This is Dropbox CSP, like, earlier this week when I did the last changes to the slides. I don't think it changed a lot. But this is actually a pretty short one. Recent research has shown that, like, people create huge lists. There was even one found that was like, far over 400 domains in the WYD list. So that is like probably longer than the actual web page. I don't want to know. CSP also in practice has other problems, which is that when you have pretty dynamic stuff that you load. So let's imagine you have Google Maps, and you have that is basically one big script, right? And this is this one page application, and depending on what the user clicks, things happen, and you really don't know, even as a developer, what actually will be loaded in there at runtime, what will happen, all those things. So if you want to define a whitelist CSP, then, well, good luck, right? And also, they change the code every single day, so it's really hard to keep up with the whatever changes developers make. Yeah, that is the maintenance problem. The other one I talked about for quite some time now, really with the shortcomings of the WYD list. So CSP 3 will contain something called strict dynamic. The assumption is you have a web page and you know what will be included initially in there, right? So you say, well, let's secure that only that stuff is loaded, what we really want, and we trust the scripts to do the right thing. So either we wrote it ourselves or we just trust whatever who wrote that. So the idea is we reuse the nonce mechanism and literally just mark all the scripts you want to include and ignore all the whitelist for scripts. Yeah. I keep it to that. It's already, Chrome already has it, so whatever Chrome version you use, hopefully the newest, that has it in there. Firefox has it in nightly at least. I don't know if they ship it already in the normal version, but yeah, it will come very soon. And in fact, Google uses it with quite a lot of their services already. Yeah, so you can see it here. I marked it red. Time in question. There's an unsafe eval up there. Is that ignored or not with the strict dynamic? I didn't say it, but can you imagine? Because yeah, well, it is not. But the point of this slide is actually it gets very confusing now. CSP, it grows. It becomes this beast, right? So CSP was like this nice thing with the whitelisting. Everybody was happy. People added some features and all this, and that was a kind of very complicated thing, and it only gets worse, basically. So, how to solve that? Well, I realized this slide is no longer very accurate. That is also why I say future of CSP. So there are thoughts about like really creating like domain-specific language. They have an extra header which translates then to CSP to pick out some features of CSP, and let just CSP grow and nobody needs to understand it. But those headers you just need to understand. They are easier to define and all this. But yeah, that is really future music here. Also, the reporting mechanism will be updated soonish and all this. But yeah, let's not focus on that too much. Now I come to an end, finally. Yeah, we talked quickly about what is CSP, data exfiltration, despite CSP. So that you're aware of this. This was the main thing for this talk. And some other cool stuff, I just want to tell you what is coming, what is there already. If you have questions, then yeah. Please.
What about the random nonce? Is it generated per session or per request, or what's
the server generates that?
Yeah.
So you can always have the same one, of course. If you just put ASDF123 in there, is of course bad.
Yeah.
So there are some there's some formats that's like it must be at least 128 bits or something long, and like the encoding and those things. But in the end, of course, it's how the server implements it and how strong you make it for your application. Yes.
Is there a best practice on how to do it?
There are some
per
libraries.
response or
Yeah, it is in the standards as described, but there are also nice scripts and libraries that do it for you, so you don't need to understand it. It's not very magical, but like it should be long enough, of course, and like be truly random and all those things. But yeah, it's easy to set up to use nonces.
So okay, I think a typical scenario would be that developer learns about CSP and reads up on all the directives and sets the default source to none, etc., etc., and then realizes, okay, so this doesn't work. So now I'm going to have to enable unsafe inline, or just forget about CSP completely. So I know that there, for instance, if you allow, as your example with, I can send images requests to Google. That's still valid if you have that specific image source allowed. But in general, would you say, okay, enable CSP with unsafe inline enabled, or just skip it until you're completely done with, so you can run without unsafe inline?
That's a tricky question. Well, the nonces are something very nice you can use.
Yeah.
Of course, that is when you have third-party stuff in there.
Right.
You cannot control really. You can trick a bit also with the without this strict dynamic part. You can trick already. Dropbox is actually doing it. They send a nonce there and then like attach it to all the libraries that dynamically include themselves. But that's a bit like dirty, I must say.
Yeah.
But in the end, this is what really strict dynamic is for. People realize that is, yeah, it's really hard to do when you have like third-party stuff or stuff you cannot control. But you trust that stuff. Otherwise, you wouldn't include it, right?
Yeah. Well, hopefully.
Yes. Otherwise, don't include stuff you don't trust, or sandbox it or whatever. And then only the initial script loads are actually checked for, and the rest is loaded. Otherwise, yeah, for now, I'm reluctant to say use unsafe inline.
Yeah.
But now that I'm standing here,
we're running with unsafe inline rather than keeping CSP off altogether, and we are fully aware of the risks involved. But I mean, it's something to get a word around internally and to hopefully find a way to actually deal with the problem. So
yes. So how I know how Dropbox was doing it. They had it also with unsafe inline, unsafe eval in the beginning, and then they step by step they kicked out the inline scripts. They got rid of this. They're working currently on the unsafe eval, but I think it was in there in the CSP, wasn't it? So they didn't quite finish that yet. But so a perfect setup, so to say, with CSP is like separating the actual HTML from the scripts. I know
right,
it's hardly possible. Yeah. But in the end, CSP is not the silver bullet, as I said. So try to deploy a CSP and then you can work on the rest.
Right. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Yes.
What happens when you have a CSP header defined on the meta tab using the meta tag and a different CSP header given away by the server?
So you have multiple CSPs, is that a question?
Yeah.
Yes, that is allowed.
Might have interfered with it, for
So
example.
we can have multiple CSPs. They are enforced in parallel. So that is also the nice thing with the HTTP equivalent thing. They can have your basic CSP and then just add another CSP, and whenever a resource is requested, it's like really one by one. It goes through the list and it must pass all defined CSP. As soon as one CSP says no, then no. So you can have multiple CSPs in parallel. Any other question? Yes?
I didn't get the difference between sub-resource integrity, was that the name of the technique?
Yes. Yeah.
And the SHA, sort of the source SHA.
That is it is for inline scripts. There's like just an alternative to nonces, basically.
Okay.
And the other one is really you have like the classic scripts source whatever, and then the URL, and then you can have this integrity attribute with the hash.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just similar. It's not the same. Otherwise, yeah.
So did you stumble across Debugging Firefox that it doesn't send, if you use the report URI and send a report from your browser to whatever system you built to analyze the reports, Firefox doesn't include the effective directive argument in the report, so you can't really use it.
Differences in the reports, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
They're currently working on this to make reports a bit more useful. But it is right, so there are certain, you get this JSON back when you have a report, you get this JSON object like back, and it has some basic information which is defined in the standard. But of course everything browsers the different, have different implementations and different extra stuff than others. So it makes it a bit, tedious to work with them. And Well,
No.
what can I say?
No, it's just a fun fact. Basically, Chrome does it properly, but Firefox doesn't. So if you have a system to analyze the reports,
Yeah.
you can't really make use of Firefox entries at all because they don't have the full.
Yeah, but Firefox has some nice script snippets where you can like maybe see where exactly it fired the violation. So yeah, but as I said, the people working on CSP, they this week actually they started a big discussion about how to do it. What is privacy violating somehow? Like some say, okay, when I have code in there, then I send it out, right? That's not so cool because there might be an identifier in there or whatever, and then I send it out to wherever. And can I trust the report server? Can I not? So yeah, it's very tricky, and there's no really good solution right now. Yeah, so I cannot really say much about it. Sorry to say that.
That's
Otherwise, I will put those online. I really don't know how if I'm allowed to do this because of all the pictures, but I will do it anyway on my webpage. So the only thing you need to remember is kind of that thing, and then there's also this is our own paper here. Some nice references. If you're interested in more statistics, which are really quite recent, you should read this one and probably also this paper. That's pretty nice. And they're also ready with the picture. Yeah. And I had this link here for checking some CSP policies. I had it already before in the slides, but there are also other nice, cool things online. This was also recently this kind of package by Google, like really nice write-up about CSP, what is good for and whatnot. And here, this is not a perfect tool, but maybe also worth checking out what is strong and whatnot. But I put it online on my webpage, and then you can look at the slides and check out the links and all this. Otherwise, I say thanks, and I hope I didn't bore you too much. Otherwise, you had enough time for the good Gothenburg Oversp Day to get the ticket. Follow Hausknecht.